Right. Welcome, everyone. And this is really exciting because this is our second OSDI meeting. I'm so happy to have the OSDI on board with the Progressive Coders Network. And what we're going to do today is more about an in-depth discussion about OSDI. And what we'll do first is we'll go around and introduce each other. Another round for those who did onboarding a while ago. So there's a lot of introductions happening so far. But in the introduction, we would like to know if you have ideas about what OSDI is. And if not, I think Josh will present like a very short intro. And then afterwards, we can start doing a Q&A, discussion of the issues in OSDI, like how can it help your project if you have a project at the moment. But why the reason, so just a really quick intro, like my name is Rappy. I reached out to OSDI when we were beginning, when I was researching about how to do prog code good. The reason for which is that I think that prog code and the OSDI presents so much capacity to be interoperable or to create that kind of connection and communication between all these tech from the left or from the progressive movement or anything from that could really help out communicate each applications that we're doing with the CRMs that are already in place. And that dynamism is so important in terms of creating that collaborative culture in prog code. And that has proved so much in the recent project that Matt Borg, who's here, has presented, or like other applications like what I'm doing actually with the map for the Indivisible group. Like it has helped us immensely. And having that kind of concrete data interface has helped me port that map and just use it, the ETL of it from other CRMs based on Action Network or ActionKit or Civic CRM. And I'm really excited how we could compile all these events into one-stop shop map for the progressive movement. But that said, my name is Rapi, and I'm really excited for this start. So tell us your name, why you're here, you have projects, and like do you know OSDI or like do you need any? Joe, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm the only Joe today. Cool. I'm Joe McLaughlin. I am one of the officers of OSDI, the membership guy, and I am now freelance. I was formerly with Citizen Action of New York in Albany, New York, which is a progressive multi-issue advocacy organization, which uses City CRM, the open source CRM, and I kind of fell into OSDI because of that. So, and I want to also, ProgCode is a member of OSDI organizationally, and which is great. We're thrilled to have ProgCode as a member, and Robbie made that happen. So, welcome.
Thanks, Joe. Jason.
Hi, I'm Jason Rosenbaum. I'm Director of Technology at Action Network. We are an OSDI member. Also, we implement OSDI for our API. And, I'm on the ProgCode Slack and answering Action Network or OSDI-related questions and discussions when I can. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Corey.
Hey, guys. Josh, we've met before. I'm from the Groundwork. I'm the Director of Engineering at the Groundwork. We ran Hillary Clinton's tech stack, which we looked at OSDI very early on. It wasn't quite where it is today. It's grown quite a bit, and kind of interested in seeing where things are.
Thank you. Adriel.
Hey, I'm Adriel Hampton. I'm the PR VP at OSDI. I'm not going to be here for the whole call, but I wanted to jump on and introduce myself. I do a lot of marketing and connecting and networking in the civic tech space, more and more around political stuff. Worked for 4 years for Nation Builder, now run my own firm. And we do more front-end projects, design and development, as well as some campaign consulting and management. But I'm always happy to help make connections and do strategy feedback for folks.
Thank you, Adriel. Ryan.
There we go. I work on the Groundwork as well with Corey. We have an API platform. I have a lot of experience in government open data formats. So it's just kind of a personal interest for me, and just kind of like seeing, I know that Prog Code is a member of OSDI, and just seeing how deeply that integration is going now, how deeply everybody wants it to go, and just what the organizational, I don't know, feelings are toward every, like, as a cohesive, environment, as a cohesive organization.
Thank you. Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen Scapoletti. I'm one of the staff here at ProgCode, and I'm sitting in today more just as a lurker. I do facilitating of relationships for members and with inside and outside relations for ProgCode, and just looking to get a little education tonight.
Thank you. Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh Cohen. I'm the chair of OSDI. I founded it about 4 years ago. And prior to that, I was at Microsoft. Then I was the tech director for the marriage campaign in Washington. And I do some mishmash of like technical consulting and development for progressives.
Thank you, Josh. Thad.
I'm a Ruby coder, and I'm here kind of to learn a little more about OSDI, and I had an idea maybe it would help people get into it, make it more accessible, to make a Rails engine to kind of simplify the process of building an OSDI compliant API. I don't know a lot about OSDI, so I couldn't get started on that right now. I'm kind of here to learn more.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Matt Board.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm building the Phone Your Rep API, which is a rep contact finding API that's focused on district offices and sorting, finding your reps by location and sorting the returns by location relevance as well. Josh was awesome at the Debug Politics hackathon where we met and helped us build an OSDI compliant layer for our sort of main rep return resource. And the API is sort of unfortunately been a little bit hard to find time to work on recently, but plan on digging in more to the spec and building out more resources for our API and getting as wide integration as we can. And so OSDI compliance is part of that strategy of integrating as widely as we can to get good data out there for people to use.
Thank you, Matt. And I guess now I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who's going to lead the whole community meeting. And yet, just a quick note, like I'm here because I also really want to learn more about the events API, because we're doing an ETL for a compilation of events. Josh, take it away. Thank you.
Okay. So before I get going, so like of the people from ProgCode, like who is this the first time for any kind of like OSDI overview? So Steven, Ryan?
I have a little bit of experience just, kind of browsing around with it. So not
Okay.
completely foreign.
Okay. All right. Let me share my screen.
Josh, just so you know, I'm a non-coder, so don't slow it down for me if it'll move it better for everybody else.
Okay. Well, you can hang out with Adriel and Joe then.
and I think thanks, Josh. I think Tad also raised his hand, and so it's two folks.
Yeah.
And then Matt, how's your familiarity?
I'm pretty. I was in one of a previous meeting and working with Josh a bit on seeing his work. I sort of have surface level familiarity, to be honest, because I hadn't had the time to dig into the spec really deeply personally. So.
Okay. Let's see. Does that work? You guys can see it?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So this is like a deck that we use at our briefings, but I'm kind of just gonna pick and choose and skip around a bit, just because I think that some of this stuff is perhaps beneath the level of tech. Or this group has a much higher technical baseline, so I'll do that. So first off, the project is OSDI, and the way we say it is OSDI. not OSDI, no offense, but I think that would probably just confuse people. We started in, let's see, the very end of 2012 or early 2013. And like I said before, so for me, I come from a software engineering background at companies like Microsoft. And in 2012, I started working on the gay marriage campaign in Washington State as their tech director. And one of the things that we wanted to do is we really wanted to have a mix and match solution of different technologies from different vendors and stuff we might write ourselves. That proved to be very difficult because there weren't any standard APIs. So we wanted to have, and we did ultimately have, a unified dashboard for our volunteers that like pulled in events from Salsa and from the van and other places. And we linked it up, but we in order to build a solution, we had to write a whole bunch of one-off connectors. Some things we just had a script, but we were lucky because in Washington, we had a lot of gay software engineers who were willing to help. So we had a team that could do this stuff. But that's not typical for most campaigns. I mean, excluding a presidential campaign where you have a firm like Groundwork and you have, they had a large number of internal engineers as well. But, most of the smaller grassroots efforts are never going to have those kind of resources. So the most that you can make commonality for, the better. For us, we ended up with this map of different systems all tied together. It was very fragile, and as a result, it was difficult to reuse by subsequent campaigns because it was very dependent on the exact modeling and product set that this particular campaign used. So, after that campaign, I started meeting with some of the other vendors and customers, and then eventually, Jason came along too. And OSDI has been moving on ever since then. And, I think there are really three main pitches for it. One is from a customer point of view, right? It basically gives the customers a greater set of choices in terms of their technology they want to use. And I think, where that relates to something like Prog Code is that, there are a number of these projects that I've seen where you're identifying a specific need, specific gap that just isn't met by existing solutions, and you're doing a good job at that. But the challenge is, how do you make your tool available to a campaign? Right? Campaigns, I mean, they may only live, excluding presidential, I mean, they may live 9 months to a year. So they don't have a lot of time. And so there's a limit to how much time they can spend integrating a new piece of software. And so having an ecosystem that is based around the common standard makes it easy for them to slot you in with their other infrastructure that they're already using. The more custom stuff they have to do for you, the higher the cost will be for them to integrate your product with their solution. So I think from a grassroots organization or grassroots ecosystem like Prog Code, this is something that will actually lower the bar for your tools to be used by the smaller campaigns or non-campaign efforts, just the same. For application developers, yeah, that's basically what I just said, where the more commonality you have, the better. And from a platform point of view, if you are building a CRM, you may want to have some of these other services work with your CRM. And from the CRM perspective, right, if you're the big guy, if you're Van or if you're NGP or Action Network, as it's becoming now, like you have the market share to attract those applications to do it, like ActBlue, for example, right? But if you're a smaller, unique CRM, it's going to be much harder for you to get the interest of the app developers to code for you. The analog here in the phone business would be app developers are going to do iOS first, Android second, and then maybe if you're lucky, BlackBerry and Windows Phone, and we know where those two latter platforms ended up. So by having the common API, right, and the Action Network has been a huge help in not only growing their own share, but also helping to raise the playing field for everybody, because the work that ActBlue did to integrate with Action Network, that's all defined by the common fundraising profile. And so if you're a smaller CRM, all you got to do is implement that profile, and then you can have ActBlue integration without any real engineering work. All you got to do is basically get ActBlue to flip a bit and turn you on if they're willing to integrate with you, if you meet the progressive criteria. So that's another way that the investment that we make in one product or one area in OSI infrastructure becomes a force multiplier that helps everybody else. All right, so on to some tech stuff. We made a decision, which it's kind of a religious issue. We chose to have a hypermedia interface, and the decision we made at the time was to use HAL. I think, this is the kind of thing where people can get pretty emotional about, but we had to make a decision, and it is what it is. And I think it's proven to be a reasonable solution that's been very helpful. It basically gives the ability to represent like relationships between resources and an extensibility framework where we have like our prefixing for vendor-specific properties and functions. It makes it easy for if there's something you want to do that the committee isn't really interested in doing, you're not going to be held back. You can build an extension very easily. It also lets us leverage ecosystem of HAL people and HAL tools. So the thing that I think Rafi had been talking about just recently, right, is the HAL browser, which is basically just a JavaScript application that's open source, which you can host like statically, or you can use somebody else's and then you can use their web app and point it to your entry point for OSDI. But it gives people a consistent interface for plugging things together. Let's see if I have you're doing that, but I have one handy here. All right. Yeah, I'll put that up in a second once it loads. But when customers are integrating different systems, a lot of, especially in a world where OSDI, where the libraries are the same, linking things together requires some work on the part of the customer, right? The data manager at the campaign, where they're gonna want to like take an API key, plug it into an API console, and then poke around to figure out. Hold on, let me share my screen here. All right, can you guys see that? Yes? No? Okay, all right. Yeah, so this interface, right, you basically are given an API key, you put it in the dialog here, and then you can basically navigate the different collections on the system. So if you want to, let's say, integrate signups from the volunteer form on the front of your Action Network site, right, you could basically use this browser to navigate to that form, view its submissions, and then you get the URL for that form submission collection. You plug that into like your other system, and then it knows basically how to get the data back and forth. So the wire up function or the prototype function is essential to create that integration, and by having the common user interface here, it makes those skills transferable, right? So what you learn by integrating with Action Network and playing with their API console is transferable to any other application. Okay, the other aspect of that is from a coding point of view. There are a fair amount of client libraries. So right here, this is basically a script that is in Python that pulls a list of new volunteers from a people collection on an OSDI endpoint. I mean, basically this navigator library essentially makes an OSDI resource a Python object, which then you can use your usual like for loops on and treat their sub-properties basically as dictionaries. The same code, same functionality implemented in Ruby. Right, pretty simple, the same, right? I use the hyperclient library, set my API token, and then again I can just grab the collection and then do the Ruby enumerator of on each one, and just the same. There's just hashes. So performing scripts that people might want to do can be easy, right? Not just for the app developers, but also like if you have a person in an organization or a campaign that has gone through like a Wellstone data training, who knows a bit of Python, right? They can basically put together some script of their own against your app if you support the OSDI protocol. Okay, yeah, so implementation-wise, so Van has a pretty reasonable OSDI connector on it. Action Network is natively OSDI, so anything they expose is either OSDI or an OSDI-style extension. There was a small CRM connector written by a Google Summer of Code student that could use some work. Accurate Append has an interface. Call Hub has one, and I guess can you talk about what you showed me today, Jason?
Let's wait on that one.
Okay, well, there are more on the way, imminently. And of course, I have a volunteer management tool called Hero that supports it as well. And yeah, we'd like to be able to see your ecosystem adopt the same thing, which makes it easier to integrate across the board. The organization itself, when I was in my job in corporate at Microsoft, I was a standards guy. So I would sit on standards committees for the company and work the process. I also served on the board of directors of one of those. So OSDI is created in the model of the way those standards organizations work. So we're a democratic institution. Everything is made by democratic decision making. We do limit our members to the progressive spectrum, and that's kind of a nuanced line that ultimately gets interpreted and voted on by the governance committee. And the governance committee is the group that decides to approve new members. Right? A motion can be made to accept Joe as a member, and then there'll be a vote on that. Within the governance committee, there's the executive committee, which kind of handles the day-to-day stuff, which Jason is our VP of outreach, Joe is our membership, and Adriel is PR, and I'm the chair. From a technical perspective, we have essentially two committees. One is what we call the liaison committee, which is a somewhat broader audience than just strict progressives. So some organizations that may be civic oriented, which are just not, they don't serve one or the other, they're just civic, or maybe there's a vendor that's very popular with Democrats, but also supports others. We may feel that it's in the interest of progressive customers to maintain a technical engagement with them. The more narrow committee is the progressive committee, where basically most of the decision making really happens. And that, the way we operate, because we don't always have consistent workload for both, is that we kind of operate as in one meeting, and we split the time where needed if necessary. But we just want to make sure that we don't make the process so overbearing that it's difficult for people to contribute. Outside the committee structure, you can contribute through GitHub. Right? We take pull requests, we take issues, and whenever something is raised at the next committee meeting, it'll be put on the agenda for the committee meetings, and then the committee will discuss whatever it is. So I think Sahil, right? He had his voting address history or voting party history thing. And so, if you do choose to put something up on GitHub, the most effective way to deal with it is to come and show up at the meeting and basically pitch it, explain it to the group, and have a discussion with them on how to move forward. There's no membership fees for it. All right, at this point, so Jason or Joe, do you want to add any additional things?
No, I'm good.
Just one thing, which is, this is the second in a series of community meetings with ProdCode folks. There is a weekly call for OSDI at 11 a.m. Eastern now, but it's not totally open. So we want to think about having additional open sessions like this for ProdCode folks, and if there's interest, we can keep doing it. So maybe if you're on the OSDI channel on ProdCode Slack, let us know, and I'll post my and Josh and Jason's and Adriel's emails to comment there. So that's it, Josh. Thanks.
Yeah, so I would just amplify that. I think our goal about this call is really to be a service to you. So if you're working on an application and you're thinking, well, okay, what would be the right way to model this in OSDI? We'll be here for you to ask those questions, and we'll hear a few different perspectives on that.
Roppy, I think you're up.
Yeah. You're on mute, Rocky. Or maybe you're not. Yeah, you are.
So I think, Roppy, what we want to do is just open it up for kind of a Q&A now. There's some issues on the Slack channel from earlier. So, but I'm not going to lead that. So perhaps Jason can facilitate that, if you wouldn't mind.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think Q&A is the way to go, right, Joe?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
I guess
cool.
one of the, maybe for the folks on the phone, right? I mean, are there, what are the apps you're working on, right?
I guess Rappy usually does stacks, right? So if someone wants to do something, say stack in the chat and we can call on you. And yeah, if you just want to talk about what you're working on or if you have questions for us, I think all that's great.
Mm-hmm. Chat rooms. Okay.
All right, Matt. Yeah, go start us off.
Cool. So I don't know. I think I mean I probably already have like the answer to this, but I was sort of like I think it's worth kind of bringing up to maybe hear you guys talk about it yourselves for the rest of the group. But so Phone Your Rep has like some data types that are not like supported or not within the sort of OSDI spec, right? So could you kind of like talk about the process of handling data that doesn't fit the spec as it's currently defined, and then how to represent that, but then also how to go about influencing the spec and changing it?
Can you give us a quick example?
Yeah, so like we have, I think probably like the classic example for Phone Your Rep would be that Office in the people resource, an address would be listed right as a attribute of the person. And in our data model, we have locations are their own resource. So the location is its own object that's associated to the person rather than an attribute. So, we have, because in our model, we have elected representatives who might have up to 9 or 10 different offices. So we have to model it as a separate resource. So that would be like our example, and how to anyway, that's our example. So
Sure. So I would say, like, to the specific question, there's probably a couple ways of dealing with it, right? As an OSDI implementer, we had to do like a lot of mapping of like our internal structures onto the OSDI API, and that can go a lot of ways, right? So like in your database, you represent locations separately from people. You might decide that when you present the OSDI API, you're going to present an array of locations on person, even though in your database, those locations are their own objects. Like, you're going to present it this way because that makes sense kind of in the use cases you're imagining for your API. So we had to do a lot of that kind of mapping for what we do. I'd say if you have a use case that isn't on the spec, there's a couple ways to do it. I would say kind of the first way usually, and especially if this is kind of a new use case that the committee hasn't considered yet, typically stuff makes it into the spec when there's like more than one organization that's interested in interoperating on that data. If there's really only one organization that like does it this way, then typically that starts out at least as a proprietary extension, right? So it's namespaced. It's kind of like browser extensions in like CSS. So it's namespaced with the name of your application, and then but then it's still done kind of in OSDI style. Like, you try to make it look like the rest of the spec, even though it's like your own little piece. And, the committee, I think, is generally interested in hearing that stuff and can help you kind of make it look like OSDI, even if it's going to be a proprietary extension. I think then in terms of, getting it into the spec, kind of when there's that interop piece when like more than one, organization or vendor or whatever it is interested in using this data between applications. That's when it starts to become a proposal. And, maybe if it started as a namespace thing, that stuff gets dropped and then it becomes part of this full spec, or sometimes it just goes straight to full spec. But I think either way, kind of the engagement is the key there. So you've got a new use case, you've got a new idea, it can start with like a work in progress pull request or something on GitHub for people to look at, but really, join the call, get some feedback from the committee members, talk through how it might work. Maybe it's starting with that vendor extension and kind of doing it in the OSDI aesthetic, but not an official spec yet, or maybe it's moving straight to the voting. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. I guess it does answer the question mostly. I'm kind of thinking like through maybe a stretch of a use case where we might actually want to represent the location as its own resource.
Sure.
And so what, like would the process follow sort of a similar path? Because that would be sort of that would be like a bigger change, I guess, right? To redefine the spec so that you're sort of adding an entire new resource. Like, would it follow sort of a similar roadmap?
Yeah, it would. I mean, I think, there's a lot of things to talk about with things like that, right? Like on the one hand, it's going to open up functionality like I'm sure you're thinking about. On the other hand, it's going to make some operations a lot more complicated, right? If you need to go to a person and then go to an additional link to like get their locations, right? But maybe there's some middle ground there. There's different ways to talk about. So I think there's just like a lot of discussion to kind of walk through to understand why some choices were made previously and then understand your new use case on the other end. But I think it's similar, right? I mean, I just came to the committee today with a proposal for an entirely new resource, an email API that would allow you to send mass emails through an API connection. So that's an entirely new resource that, kind of uses some things we already have on the spec, but also introduces some new concepts. So, I expect there's going to be a lot of discussion around that in the coming weeks as we kind of push it forward. But, that's okay. That's what the committee process is for.
Yeah, I would add, so there's no distinction in the process about whether or not it's a new resource or not. I think, it's not so much a process issue. I think where things get difficult is where a breaking change is being discussed, right? I think we look to avoid that. The point, this particular thing is a good example because it's back in the beginning, we did go back and forth on whether or not addresses were a part of the person or separate resources, and we landed where we landed. And so with your scenario, one of the things you might also consider is that maybe it's not a person, right? I mean, because what you're actually communicating is something a little bit different. Like, it's not necessarily that they're, different postal addresses like you would consider on a person. It's actually like locations, right? Like venues, their offices. So it may be that like the elected official is a different resource than a person. Right. And what's so funny, Corey?
Sorry.
Yeah. So maybe they're not really a person, right? They're a different resource, right? And that's just a different set of fields that are similar but not the same as person. And then they would have a collection of addresses for their locations. And maybe that location resource is not exactly the same as an address. I don't know. But I think, it certainly seems like the scenario that you want to accomplish is something that we want to have covered in OSDI. It's not the first time it's come up.
Cool. Awesome. That's really helpful answers. Thank you.
Cool.
So before we close that out, so I think what would be great and what we'd ask you to do is, can you like sketch out the draft of what you think needs to be captured for elected official and their office locations and bring that to committee for discussion?
Yeah, definitely.
And it can be very, very light. Don't, if you want to do a pull request, if that's like an easy thing for you to do to write a little bit of markdown, like go ahead. But, it doesn't have to be super perfect. We expect it to be a work in progress. That's fine.
Okay, cool.
cut and paste the link to Jason's pull request, which is a good example of creating a new resource.
Awesome.
All right, who's next? If you want to talk, just hit stack in the chat.
Yeah, well, so the groundwork guys. So, yeah, what are you guys working on? When are you guys going to have OSDI compliance?
You want to go to this, Corey?
Yeah, I'll take that. It's a good question. And Josh, when we last spoke with the campaign, obviously I think you're nailing something with at the national level. Campaigns end up doing a lot of crazy stuff. And then in our interactions with organizations like NGP did not have a working API, period. Never mind an API that was compliant with OSDI. And I am kind of curious on your take on with the partners, especially how many people have actually gone through and done a full implementation at this point, because it was not the case that most of the partners had actually implemented it.
Well, first I would say that the metric of, or the phrase full implementation is probably more harmful than helpful, because nobody's going to have a full implementation, because I doubt there's any product that supports every type of resource that's modeled in OSDI, right? So it's more about, like, for the given product you're working on, what kind of data do you expose, like, in your interop surface area, and are those OSDI or not? And so that's I think more realistic. And
let me add to that, Josh. I think there's different types of implementers, right? I think, Action Network and Van have OSDI APIs, but there are a bunch of other implementers that don't have OSDI APIs, but they have integrations with OSDI endpoints, because that's the correct role for them, right? So, like ActBlue, they want to integrate with other services. It's less important that they have their own API, though I think they do, but it's more important that they're able to send data to these other services that the people who are using ActBlue are using. So that's us, that's Blue State Digital, that's NGP, whatever it is. So, the groundwork being a developer-focused digital organizing tool, not necessarily like the master CRM, I imagine you're integrating with a lot of things. And so doing an integration to the OSDI standard, like using our API or using Van's API to do it, that potentially gets you an integration with other OSDI implementers now and in the future. It's maybe not exactly plug and play, but it takes down that work for later, right? And so you don't necessarily have to make your API OSDI compliant, but the integration hooks that you use to other services, one of them could be to an OSDI API and therefore to many services at once.
Absolutely.
It kind of depends. I mean, it depends on, like, well, I guess, how would you classify the groundwork as a piece of software? Like, is it more like the application, or is it more like a CRM that other apps integrate with you, via some protocol? So, and I don't know, and maybe you could help us, but let's say this, right? I mean, let's assume, right, that the groundwork is like a desired and sought after service or piece of software, right? And so other organizations will want to integrate with you. And so, if you see yourself maybe like ActBlue for the moment, right, the larger CRMs are going to be able to get your attention, like, let's say Action Network, right? And so whatever investment you make to integrate with Action Network is reusable, because the smaller CRMs that, let's say, would never get your attention, right? I mean, in principle, you probably do want to integrate with all of them, but you just don't have the resources to do them all. And so what you could say is, hey, we've implemented the XYZ profile in OSDI. If you want to integrate with us, you just go do this, right? And then, like, it's easy.
So to get to, I think, back to Corey's question, it was, for that to happen, though, multiple groups, like VCRMs, all have to, at least some critical mass of them has to start implementing this integration point that is OSDI compatible, right? And so I think that's where the question is, like, how many of these, like, if we wanted to integrate with NGP, if we wanted to integrate with Civis or ActBlue or any of these groups, how is the ecosystem now?
Well, I
For,
think that
for those pieces that we do implement and that we could share data with, and that.
So I think right now we have eight implementations, I think, and they all do different things depending on what the organization does. But us, Van, a little bit of Civi CRM, ActBlue, what else is there? Call Hub, Accurate Append, another one coming soon that I'm not quite ready to announce. Anyway, I think the list is about 8 right now. And I mean, growing all the time as people do integrations, right? Certainly we're driving some integrations because things like Call Hub and ActBlue want to integrate with us. Van's driving some integrations. Other people like Civi CRM, they're kind of doing the code on their own because they want their API to be OSDI compliant or have a version of their API to be OSDI compliant. So, it grows in various ways, right? I mean, I guess, the pitch to some extent would be you're doing these integrations anyway, right? Or at least some of them. So this one's no harder than any other. And, it gets you some economies of scale now and probably more in the future as this grows.
So are most of those integrations that exist, are they mostly export? Like, so if you want your data from ActBlue, you can get it in OSDI format. But like Civi CRM, is it both import and export, or is it is it just
I would say it's
out from most of these?
Right. It's about half and half. I think about half of them are import export, like here's an API. The other is kind of an integration service. So like ActBlue will send you your data in OSDI format, right? Call Hub goes both ways, right? So I think it's about half and half.
Yeah, I think 2 other dynamics to consider. And one is, it's hard to answer the question because I don't have a good understanding of what Groundwork is and does, and like what are your key interop scenarios. But the other also is that, and this is not unique to OSDI, it's just a dynamic in the standards world, which is that there's a tendency for people to sit on the fence and say, well, I'm going to wait till other people go and do it, and then I'll go and do it, right?
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
like if everyone does that, then nobody's going to do it. So I think, I would ask you guys, I mean, you guys are you're an organization where I think people will look to you as leaders. And so if you guys embrace it, right, you're gonna be part of the large entities that other people see and say, well, Groundwork is doing it. That's the direction they're heading, right? And that helps reinforce the model that I think we all want, which is that this is the direction we want to be heading. And so, I guess the risk that I worry about, right, is that if you're sitting on the fence and in the meantime you're like growing a increasingly large proprietary API, right, then the farther you go with that, then the more the someday we'll do OSDI becomes a fable because you're just going to be stuck, right? And so what I would hope is that you could rip the Band-Aid off now and make that your direction.
The other thing I'll say is, and I want to get to Matt and Corey, I want to give you a chance to respond. The other thing I'll say is, as someone who built our OSDI API from scratch, we had no other API, it was also a group of people who had sat down and done some thinking about API design. And so some choices had been made that had some thinking behind it, and some technology was chosen, and we just didn't have to rethink that. So that was nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting, Josh, that you ask. I think we're still trying to figure out where exactly do we want to target moving forward. Obviously, we want to help down ballot. Obviously, we're basically giving the product away for free now. We'd like to see, we're trying to make an impact for anyone who is looking for a place to start from a technology standpoint with progressive technology, which, quite frankly, a lot of people at the table are. And that's great. And I think we're in favor of fostering community around that. I think we're in favor of pushing these things. I don't know in 2 years now when someone comes to me and says, hey, what should we do for the next presidential campaign? What my answer is going to be.
Well, yeah.
And I imagine that conversation will happen at some point. God, I hope it happens at some point.
Yeah, right.
Well, I don't know. We're going to have kings now.
Yeah.
I want to make sure. I want to make sure we have time for Matt again because he put himself in the stack. Matt, go ahead.
I don't want to take too away from this conversation because it's just sort of something related. And it was when Jason, you were talking about people on the fence, and I know it's like groundwork is sort of trying to see how they can integrate and make that work with their development. And that question is really about like how common it is with APIs that are compliant to have two layers, like a compliant layer and then a proprietary layer. Like, is that a common thing for people who are on the fence? If it's just like, well, take your data represented OSDI compliant if you can find the time, if you get the time to do that,
right?
But serve it both ways for other people who are not yet integrated.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is dependent on organizational history, right? So like a lot of, the original members of OSDI, most of them already had APIs. So, so then they're serving them side by side, right? Dan's an example. They've got their proprietary API, then they have an OSDI version that has the same functionality, just kind of expressed in different ways. We're an example because of our organizational history. We came to OSDI before we had an API, so OSDI is our only API. I think that's true of a lot of the prog code projects that are coming up, right? Yours and maybe others. Like, we're seeing a lot of these new projects that, because of organizational history, OSDI is a nice starting point. Again, like, the thinking's already been done, or at least some of it's been done. And so, it gives you kind of a platform to stand on. You don't have to start from scratch. So I think that question is a lot more about organizazational history. I would say, I know Josh would say, I would say for myself, probably we would love it if OSDI were the only API. At least I understand the realities of history and things there. So, I think it varies, and I think it more has to do with the history of the thing than anything else.
Yeah, if you're starting from someplace near the beginning, right, then OSDI can, as Jason said, right, there's a lot of, basically think about those arguments you don't have to have. And there were many of them about,
and you have no existing integrations that you're going to break or whatever, right? It's definitely nicer to start from a green field. I'm sure we all agree.
Yeah, and as far as the double layer thing, another thing I think is probably another manifestation of that is if you go the OSDI route, but there are some things that just don't fit, then the proprietary layer can be your extensions on top of OSDI.
Right.
So, if you're just like, if you think, we just cannot live with the OSDI event model, well, okay, fine, right? They create another event model, but just do it with the same OSDI conventions that we have so that people can still use the common tool set that they're using and the knowledge they've learned to access your alternative events model.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool. We've got a couple more minutes here, not many. So if folks have, more they want to talk about, cool. Ryan, go for it.
Just another question about, so the API, it's just, a standard API. Like, one thing that we've been exploring internally for our own use and also to help support our, the users of our platform in sort of tracking the overall model of engagement for supporters. So for those that don't know, we offer, we have a donations platform, we have grassroots event hosting, we have supporter signups, we have peer-to-peer fundraising, we have all of those things. And the thing that, we found is important is being able to track user engagement, or track end-user engagement, supporter engagement. And we've been exploring something like GraphQL for that. We are using that internally. How do you see OSDI evolving into something that is, I guess, more cohesive, like instead of having to make multiple API calls across your entire service, across your entire API surface area?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I've checked out GraphQL a bit myself, nothing beyond like little tests. I think it's really interesting. I wonder how it works at scale. Maybe you'll be able to tell me.
Yeah, it's working really well for us. We use that to drive the majority of our administrative interface.
Okay, cool.
Kind of like where, organization, administrators or organizers can go and look up and see like, how their donations are doing. How's a specific like initiative that they're running doing? If they want to go look up a specific supporter, like by email address, they can see, oh, well, Jason, signed up for an email blast, then he hosted an event, then he attended 2 more events, and then he donated $500, and they get a singular view of that, and it's,
Yep. Nice. Yeah, no, I think GraphQL is pretty interesting. I would say we've had no specific discussions about it. I know Josh and I have discussed it briefly. I don't know. I think it's interesting. That's probably about where it's at right now.
Yeah, we've had like, well, I don't know if this would be a match for this, and I'm not necessarily recommending that this would be a way to go, but in terms of like, I just from looking at it, GraphQL seems like it could be viewed as like an alternative to the HAL or the marshalling layer, right? And so at one point when we had a conversation with this group when it was still Coders for Sanders, someone was like, well, someone had said something like, they just love JSON API, and they, HAL was the blocker for them. And so it's like, well, I guess if that's how it is, you can basically take the OSDI model and expose it via JSON API. And maybe, if you have to have GraphQL, you could expose the OSDI via GraphQL. Not
I think the other interesting thing about GraphQL is that, you may be right in that it's like HAL and like it's a presentation layer, but I actually almost see it as a different use case, one that OSDI really doesn't do a lot of. OSDI is really focused on data exchange between 2 systems, facilitating sync, and GraphQL really excels on kind of things you were talking about, kind of longitudinal analysis or historical analysis or like streams of information, which is not something that OSDI, that's not like the founding use cases of it, but like very valid use cases. So there's also like maybe GraphQL and the kind of data exchange OSDI version live side by side in some ways, because
that's
at least in my plan, right? Like at least in my playing with GraphQL, it would be somewhat hard to build a sync service built on GraphQL, but it's really easy to build like an awesome interface that like shows me some historical trends and stuff like that. So I don't know. That's interesting.
Right. Yeah. Just getting back to the whole like implementation of it, the way that our platform works in a lot of ways, it'd be a lot more valuable for us to have real-time interoperability rather than just sync and pull and that kind of stuff.
I agree. And like webhooks is one that's like been on our roadmap for a while. And like, we're kind of waiting for like the first couple people who are like going to be like, okay, I've got some like time and development resources to implement it, because we don't like to like build stuff in a prospective way. We like to build it, based on the use case. But yeah, I agree on the real time. Corey?
Yeah, kind of towards that. I am kind of curious about how you're handling or how you are seeing customers handle larger data sets. Obviously, we just came out of a national campaign and massive, just an absurd amount of data. And the model for OSDI, especially thinking about API, was just something where it wasn't even possible. Like we were doing full data syncs in very different ways. Are you guys thinking about that use case, or is it just such an edge for you? No, like, again, how many national campaigns are there? It's not common.
We're thinking there's a couple things. So one is, we definitely tried to build as close to real time as we could. And I think the webhooks will like fully get us there, right? So like we tried to build like sync services in a way where you can just pull changes using, queries. So what's changed since the last time you hit the endpoint? So like, instead of running syncs every day, you could run them every hour, and the volume of data is at least somewhat more manageable, though obviously on, a national campaign, maybe even that's crazy. So like that's one. We've started talking about what like a bulk exports proposal looks like, again, kind of waiting on the implementers there. And I think there's some friction just in terms of like the consumers versus providers of things like that, right? Like me as a provider, I don't think I'm ever going to implement bulk exports because they're really resource intensive and we feel we need to filter them through our user interface to do them like in a way that doesn't kill servers. But people on the consuming end would love to get a bulk data file as opposed to having to page through hundreds of thousands of pages of our API, right? So anyway, but that one, there's been some talk about that. And then, you know, I think there are things that are just like, you know, orthogonal to API, like, you know, SQL mirrors and stuff like that. Josh?
Yeah, so speaking of exports, yeah, so like there's an experimental proposal for exports, which I wrote, which is sort of to put a mental stake in the ground. But yeah, those were what Jason described are the, you know, the tensions. But my view is that, and what that proposal covers, right, is that you have a workflow where you make an export request, and then there's still like a human policy guy that approves or rejects it. And once they approve it, then your API client gets to learn, oh, it's been approved. Now I can go get it, right? Which basically prevents the, you know, some foolish client doing a full download every 5 seconds problem.
And there are some people who really do this in production already. I mean, Catalyst definitely has a bulk API. You know, I think we can talk about whether we like it or not, those of us who have used it. But, you know, they are shipping files around. So, you know, interesting.
And there's a very interesting,
Go ahead.
sorry, Stack. There's a very interesting project in Prog Code. Corey, you might have joined the channel, a national voter file. It's a real tough row to hoe. They're finding it challenging, but I think it's very interesting that it's happening. It's moving along. There's a bunch of issues to deal with, but they're Ben Galuski from Chicago is cranking away on it. So, I mean, one of the big reasons I heard about OSDI, and I was like, oh my God, finally someone's doing this. Because Citizen Action is uses City CRM, but we are a member, really a convener of these civic engagement tables in New York State. And through that, Citizen Action uses Van, the flavors of the Van, and it has access to Catalyst. But so the holy grail was being able to pull voter data from Van into our Civi CRM and sync up all our stuff. That hasn't happened yet, and shame on me for not making it happen. Josh, I think you're just talking about was part of a reaction to me, kind of trying to pester about that. And as Jason's pointed out, it's not OSDI designed to be kind of constant syncing or 5-minute pulls, but I really believe, I mean, the activity on National Voter File, the interest, everyone's trying to figure out how to do things better, differently, because we lost. There's a real groundswell of creative thought. I believe there's a wide customer base of groups like Citizen Action, progressive folks doing political community organizing that can be, would really love to some of the stuff that OSDI has the potential to help facilitate. And I kind of hope vendors like NGP Van, Catalyst help meet what I think is that demand for, doing stuff better. Anyway, I got to go though. Thanks so much. My wife's
we are up on time. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining. It was really good to meet some new folks, talk to some old folks. So anyway, yes, thank you. And hopefully we'll do this again soon. We did one of these about a month ago. I think it was a good discussion. Good discussion tonight as well. So thanks so much for joining, everybody.
Yeah, wait, hold on. So wait, what's Corey? What's your Corey is the groundwork, right? Okay.
And I think we're all on the Slack channel on the OSDI channel on the Procode Slack too.
On Procode. Cool.
Yep. Cool.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rafi.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.